3 years ago, some French game developers released a trailer that looked impossible. On April 19th, 2023, Alexander Spindler posted the ad for Unrecord, a body camera FPS. It picked up tens of millions of views within a few days, a whole news cycle, countless takes and reactions and hype. There has only been that one trailer, and yet the game, as of now, is the 10th most wishlisted thing on Steam, above AAA titles from major publishers. Most indie devs would kill for a tiny fraction of Unrecord's visibility. Why? Why did it make such a big splash? Because Unrecord looks like this. The trailer, 2 minutes of seemingly raw gameplay footage, features an exploration of and shootouts within some sort of rundown warehouse. And the footage is deeply unnerving. To cut to the chase, it looks real. Comments reflect this, jokes and accusations about how this is actual body cam footage rather than rendered in a game engine. Shortly after posting the trailer, Spindler would upload proof of its artifice, spinning around in the game's environments, shooting wildly in the same warehouse. For those who thought Unrecord was fake or a video, sorry, he said. A funny tweet, given that he was being asked to prove that Unrecord was fake. Prove that it wasn't reality. Unrecord still has no release date nor playable demo. But in the 3 years since its announcement, others have come along with the same goal and techniques. Make a game that doesn't look like a game. Make a first-person shooter that looks like real life. First out the door was a multiplayer shooter titled, bluntly, Bodycam. And just a few months ago, solo dev Montegallo released the single-player shooter Better Than Dead. These offer the opportunity to dive into the aesthetic, understand what makes these games look so different than every other shooter. And the answer I've stumbled upon is a fairly simple one. The games don't look real because they look good. They look real because they look bad. Let me explain, because this is not a slight on the talent behind the game. The style starts with the perspective, captured as a wide-angle fisheye lens. Unrecord, Bodycam, Better Than Dead all have these warped vignettes at the corners of the screen. Unlike most shooters, which present basically a flat plane of reality, the outer edges of these games curl inward, like they're being distorted by a lens filming the scene. The lens effects don't stop there. Each of these games is chock full of blurs and flares and dirt and other imperfections, typically undesirable elements of professional filmmaking that here give gameplay a sense of unscripted legitimacy. This continues with the way your perspective reacts to light. Compared to most games, these shooters have a very low dynamic range, meaning you will struggle to look at bright and dark things simultaneously. The sky, when viewed from a shadowy interior, will appear completely blown out. The inverse is true outside, and adjustments to different light conditions happen slowly, visibly. The aesthetic crosses into the mechanical most pointedly with the depiction of the body and the positioning of your method of interaction, the gun. Typical shooters, from Doom to Doom, keep your gun and reticule perfectly locked in place. No matter how fast you whirl around, your character's arms will keep up with your character's body, ready to shoot the exact middle of the screen. In effect, you are controlling the gun, not the character behind it. The gun aims, the gun jumps, the gun spins. This is accentuated by the fact that in most shooters you don't actually have a body at all. You are arms and a gun floating about 6 feet off the ground. Part of why these body cam games look so ungamey is they subvert that visual language. Your character's arms move somewhat independently of your perspective. In Better Than Dead, I can point and shoot into the upper right or left of the screen, something completely impossible in Doom, honestly more akin to the motion-controlled shooters on the Wii. While playing on a mouse and keyboard, it gives the strange feeling that you're controlling a set of arms that your perspective can barely keep up with. And yes, if you look down, you do have feet. There are more visual tricks the games are pulling. Both Unrecord and Better Than Dead take place on overcast days, massively simplifying shadow rendering. Both also choose to pixelate the faces of NPCs in the environment, a stylish move that also removes the need to render realistic human beings with realistic expressions. But the biggest reason these games look real is in the name of the budding genre. They are not aiming for realism, they are aiming for, literally, photorealism. The way the world looks through a camera. Today, the first-person perspective is nearly synonymous with both aspects of these titles, gaming and body cameras. First-person shooters are some of the most popular games in the world. First-person interactions from the perspective of body cams are scrutinized by millions, psychoanalyzing the behavior of a cop or a civilian by the footage of a camera pinned to a chest. But the effort to record a first-person perspective began prior to either of these inventions, far before a camera could simply be attached to the body. In the history of cinema, the most notable early use of first-person is in Robert Montgomery's 1947 noir Lady in the Lake. It is not the first time a movie included scenes meant to be read from the perspective of a character. That is likely Abel Gance's Napoleon, a 5+ hour epic from 1927. But Lady in the Lake holds a place in cinema history for the scale of its first-person ambitions, an entire feature-length film that is told almost exclusively through the eyes of its protagonist. And its successes are certainly impressive, for the time. Montgomery approximates driving, fistfights, wandering eyes, all through the lens of an enormous and hard-to-maneuver film camera. But at the same time, the movie serves as a reminder of the strengths of traditional cinematography. The whole film is a series of oneers, which may be impressive for action scenes, but makes conversations feel punishingly slow and dry. A contemporaneous New York Times review notes that the protagonist of Lady in the Lake talks too much. The review says that if the film wants viewers to be immersed in the protagonist's head, he shouldn't say things the audience wouldn't say, preempting the silent protagonists of first-person shooters by about a half-century. I think the most interesting issue with the style comes from these showy shots where conversations are held while gazing into a mirror, so we're able to see our main character. In these mirror shots, however, Robert Montgomery is looking at the other character, but I'm looking at him. This inconsistent eye line is jarring. To state an obvious fact about mirrors, you cannot catch yourself looking away. You can only make eye contact. More than the stiff camera moves or dialogue lines, it is this, the attempt to give our main character a body, that ironically disconnects me from him. The first-person camera would continue to be a known, if seldomly deployed, tool for filmmakers. Hitchcock used it periodically, sometimes including guns and strikingly modern-looking FPS shots. In Vertigo, his most famous use of the perspective instead approximates the subjectivity of vision, a beautifully acrophobic dolly zoom. Samuel Fuller's 1964 film The Naked Kiss begins with Constance Towers assaulting the perspective of the audience. Mike Nichols' 1967 film The Graduate has the sequence when Dustin Hoffman wanders out into a party fully clad in a scuba suit. We're suddenly locked into Hoffman's head, scuba mask blocking off both his peripheral vision and any noise from the scene. Friends and family holler silently at him. He plunges into a pool. All these scenes draw attention to the artifice of the perspective. Hitchcock's impossible camera moves, Fuller's rapid, disorienting cuts, Nichols' limiting of vision and sound. They all imply, in a way, that this would be a horrible perspective to actually watch a movie from. Thank God for the typical omniscience of the camera, we think. What a dreadful thing it'd be to be stuck in here. This feeling predicts the next big move in first-person cinema, full-blown horror. In Black Christmas, Halloween, and Friday the 13th, the audience is treated to extended first-person sequences from the view of the killer himself. The scenes are noticeably similar to each other, the camera bobbing voyeuristically around and through seemingly safe suburban houses. The perspective accomplishes a couple goals at once. One, it shows us the moves of the killer while concealing his identity, similar in many ways to Psycho's famous shower scene. But two, and more insidiously, the films place us inside the head of the villain, making the audience an unwitting accomplice in the stalking and thrill of the kill. The camera style is, in this case, accusatory. Aren't you also enjoying peering through the windows, the perspective asks? Is this an urge that lies within you, too? The use of the perspective in horror highlights the challenge of first-person storytelling in non-horror genres of cinema. It is an uncanny, uncomfortable way to experience film. Although fragments of first-person perspectives are everywhere, in theory, if a character looks at an object and then the film cuts to a shot of that object, we are seeing it from their perspective, extended periods spent inside a character's head start to feel strange, disorienting, almost claustrophobic. But this uncomfortability works well for the goals of horror. In those early slashers, the technique agitates the familiar, effectively disrupting the notion of the safe American suburbs. And that uncanniness is put to even greater effect when joined with the desire to simulate the unhuman. In an essay on the origins of the first-person shooter, Alexander Galloway points out that some of cinema's most effective first-person shots come from the desire to show a technologically impacted perspective. In other words, Terminator vision, the construction of RoboCop, the heat-sensitive view of the Predator. Instead of attempting to emulate the organic imperfections of our own eyes, these films embrace the artificiality of the artificial, the uncanniness of a sight that is so different from our own. Lady in the Lake fails, not because it doesn't get it right, but because it doesn't get it wrong enough, Galloway writes. It tried to merge the camera body with a real human body, a dubious proposition. Whereas in films like RoboCop or The Terminator, the camera merges with an artificial body, one that is more similar to the machinic apparatus of film itself. He calls this a necessary deviation from classical representation, a layer on top of our traditional visual language, a digital patina. This, the digital patina, is, I would argue, the most meaningful step in our evolution of the first-person perspective. Which is ironic, because it is a step away from our own bodies. But it also makes sense, because any filmic perspective is necessarily shown on a screen, what Galloway refers to as the machinic apparatus of film itself. Maybe trying to pretend that we're not looking at technology is just too big of an ask. The fact is, our expectations of what reality looks like through a screen are completely shaped by the norms and capabilities of the technology we record it with. Movies are shown at 24 frames per second, a number originally chosen a century ago out of mechanical necessity. We do not perceive the real world at a mere 24 frames per second, but now that is our unconscious expectation, our idea of what cinema looks like. If you have seen high frame rate experiments like Ang Lee's Gemini Man, the experience is deeply bizarre. Ordinarily rote things, frames of blowing curtains and ocean waves, become absolutely hypnotizing, like the screen itself has become a window. But the human subjects of the film do not benefit. It feels, strangely enough, like you can see them acting. With 96 extra frames per second, you can watch them remember their lines. James Cameron's Avatar sequels also use a higher frame rate in specific sequences with less jarring results. But then again, there's almost no reality to replicate in those films. Everything, the camera, the environments, the characters, are born from the same computers. We are also more than happy to adjust our expectations based on context. Regular television with motion smoothing looks vile, but sports broadcasts look fine. Movies at 60 frames per second pull us away from the experience, but games at 60 frames per second are broadly preferred. And other elements of the camera's view. As mentioned before, its bloom and lens flares, its jostle and imperfect focus, can draw the audience closer, shrinking the perceived gap between the film and the real world. These ideas first gained traction with a crucial genre, one I have up until now ignored: documentary. A specific style of documentary, even. Cinema verite, translated as truthful cinema, or even more bluntly, film truth, was a movement that emerged in the early 60s alongside developing camera technology. As documentarians gained access to cameras they could haul around by hand, they were able to shoot in looser, more in-the-moment style, less bound to pre-scheduled interviews and pre-decided filming locations. One of the most famous examples of the style, Robert Drew's film Primary, follows the 1960 Wisconsin primary election between Hubert Humphrey and JFK. The documentary features no talking heads or clumsily guiding narration. It simply inserts a camera into the ongoing campaigns. Many of the shots are shaky or obstructed, but instead of detracting from the film, these shots make the viewer feel like they've been granted access to something intimate, something actually candid from people whose lives are entirely performance. And yet, the camera is present. Everyone knows it. It cannot blend into the background. Part of cinema verite's acknowledgement of film truth is that the camera inevitably changes the way people interact. The truth is it cannot capture perfect reality. Aspects of cinema verite remain omnipresent in our filmmaking language. The crash zooms that seemingly struggle to keep up with pre-rendered VFX, unsteady cameras and action sequences, basically the whole language of mockumentary, all convey the idea that the perspective we're seeing is from a real improvising cinematographer, the camera functioning as a mechanical first person. 2/3 of the way through the Blair Witch Project, a character picks up the eye of the film, a high-8 camcorder, and looks through it. "I can see why you like this video camera so much," he says. "It's not quite reality. It's like filtered reality. You can pretend everything is not quite the way it is." The film, though not the first example of the found footage genre, melds the filming style of cinema verite and Galloway's idea of the digital patina into a single remarkable vessel. Originally sold as a genuine documentary, Blair Witch is instead proof of the efficacy of draping an aesthetic of reality over a fictional story. The film is ostensibly investigating the legends of the Blair Witch in the forests of Maryland. Heather Donahue, the director and star of this feature, recruits her friend Josh and another student, Mike, to venture out into the woods and gather evidence and footage. One of the formalistically fascinating things about the Blair Witch Project is Donahue does not seem to be aiming for a verite production. The film uses two cameras, the previously mentioned high-8 camcorder and a CP16, a relatively huge 16mm film camera. The CP16, in black and white, is what most of the actual documentary footage is shot on, like these stiff shots of Donahue explaining the legend. The high-8 is instead a sort of wandering eye, a reflexive impulse by Donahue to document the creation of the documentary. As the trio loses themselves in the woods and unravels, Mike and Josh repeatedly ask her, "Why are you still filming? Why won't you just put the camera down?" Donahue offers one explanation. "It's all I have left," she sobs, after being castigated by Mike. But I actually think the other reason, mumbled by Josh earlier, rings more true. It's like a filtered reality. They keep filming through the dark and death and hauntings because of some unconscious belief that the film will keep them safe. You can pretend everything is not quite the way it is. Found footage was not a term in popular usage at the time of Blair Witch's release. Daniel Myrick, one of the film's directors, refers to it as something else: a first-person movie. Is it ironic, then, that the film's most iconic scene is not shot from one of the characters' perspectives? In Donahue's final monologue, she turns the camera on herself, confessing that she's sure none of them will make it out of the forest alive. In doing so, she severs the connection between herself and the perceived safety of the camera. She ceases to be the first person. Instead, she gives that horror and that responsibility to the audience, that, if nothing else, this artificial eye will remember her death. The Blair Witch Project hit 1999 audiences like a tidal wave, generating enormous amounts of money, imitators, and theories on the veracity of its story. But in the 90s, something even more seismic was happening to the public's perception of first person. It was going to hell. It was shooting, it was chainsawing. Doom came out. That's what happened. Doom was not the first-person shooter. Prior to Doom, developer id Software had also released the dungeon-crawling Catacomb 3D and the Nazi-slaying Wolfenstein 3D. Years earlier, titles like Maze War and Battlezone were also played from a theoretical first-person perspective, the player assuming the cockpit view of a spaceship or tank. But it was almost certainly Doom, a game played by tens of millions, a game so inescapable that at one point it was installed on more computers than Windows 95, that would forever alter modern audiences' relationship with a first-person perspective. As was the case with found footage, the games actually preceded their genre title. Wolfenstein and Doom weren't referred to as first-person shooters until years after their release. Most other 3D shooters of the early and mid-90s were simply categorized as Doom clones. Doom didn't sell itself as a first-person game at all. Its box reads, "Doom is an awesome virtual reality action game for your PC." Virtual reality didn't mean what it does today, a helmet and a cleared area in your living room, but a more nebulous sense of being there, a blurring together of the perspective of the gamer and the perspective of the game itself. In pursuit of that virtual reality, the presence of a body is a clear focus in Doom. Although the protagonist, Doom Guy, doesn't have a visible torso or legs, the omnipresent gun bobs up and down as he moves. When using your fists, his whole hairy arm appears on screen. And underneath the action, at all times, his face is locked to the center of the screen. A visual shorthand for your health, sure, but also a reminder that you are not simply controlling a gun, but the man behind it. If you're willing to extend some empathy to the hysterical, the 90s panic over shooters as training for real-life violence is understandable. A fear that the promised virtual reality may affect actual reality. The US Army was certainly willing to roll the dice. In 1996, they released Marine Doom, an official mod for the game designed for training in tactical decision-making. And although there remains no evidence that playing violent video games, first-person or otherwise, causes violent behavior in real life, Doom's influence on the outside world continues to be felt. The 90s left us with the impacts of Doom and the Blair Witch Project, two diverging visions of what a first-person perspective should look like. In time, these two visions would be stitched back together. But not before some seriously awkward growth stages. Up until the mid-2010s, there was a default answer whenever the question was raised of first-person filmmaking, and it was not a flattering one. The 2005 Doom movie, directed by Andrzej Bartkowiak and starring The Rock, is a failed adaptation in virtually every way. It does not capture the heavy metal spirit of the original games. It instead opts for a tone I can only describe as aliens, but everyone is a horny jackass. Its scares fall flat. Its action scenes take place almost entirely in confusing darkness. It has this line: "I can't decide if it's terrible or kind of great."
Does it ever bother you you could have spent your life looking in a microscope instead of a sniperscope?
But I would bet that no one remembers any of that about the movie. I don't think anyone remembers anything about the movie, except that at almost exactly the 90-minute mark, Karl Urban injects himself with a Martian chromosome, and the film slams into a 5-minute dialogue-less first-person oneer. The film's script describes it as this: "Now we are the first-person shooter." The sequence is, to give it credit, ambitious. I can appreciate the choreography, the stunts, and the practical effects, the real sets and clever hidden edits, but the feeling is all wrong. The camera work is way too smooth, no bumps, no jostle, no sense of spontaneity. It's the opposite of Verite, just a practiced-to-death sequence of actors hitting their marks. The angle of the gun is strange, not really being aimed or shot from the hip, but somewhere in the middle. In fact, as revealed in behind-the-scenes footage, the gun isn't there at all. It's a separate element added on top of the screen in post. As others have observed before me, the whole thing just feels like one of those carnival rides where cardboard cutouts pop out at you and make a sound. Also, side note, the whole script for this section is written in first person, which is really funny. I jam my gun under its chin. Blam! As I walk past, I hear a stutter. The first time I remember being impressed at a first-person action sequence was 5 years later in Matthew Vaughn's Kick-Ass. The shots are more limited and mixed with traditional cinematography, but still pretty successful, thanks to a wider field of view, better hand acting, and the digital patina of night vision goggles. We're moving faster and skipping over more things now. Gaspar Noé's Enter the Void, Frank Calhoun's Maniac. There's a whole other essay to be written on the chaotic, intrusive first-person perspectives that make up the British sitcom Peep Show.
Wow! I've been initiated. I am a drug user. Fuck the police!
But video games in this same period solidified their first-person view of the world into something fairly uniform. 6 feet or so off the ground, gun on the right side of the screen, a noticeable but not nauseating amount of head bob while running. There are exceptions. Several games are played from third person and switch to first only while aiming. The advent of virtual reality allows for a basically true first-person perspective, with players able to look and act independently. Before your eyes makes a physical blink into its most important mechanic, tying the limitations of the player's actual eyes into the story of the game. My beloved Kane and Lynch 2, Dog Days, is one of the most bizarre examples where an apparent third-person shooter is actually a sort of first-person found footage game in which you control both the shooter and the unacknowledged camera person running after them. Like most found footage and the new Bodycam shooter trend, Dog Days finds great style in the technical limits of the camera. But for the most part, first-person games of the 21st century have settled into a comfortable groove, so recognizable that films, much more successfully than Doom, have approximated a video game aesthetic. The pinnacle of these attempts at first-person cinema, the most dizzying heights of purely adapting the gamic viewpoint, dropped in almost the same year. Jung Byung-gil's The Villainess and Ilya Naishuler's Hardcore Henry. What these films are able to achieve is due, in large part, to camera technology. Whereas everything from Lady in the Lake to Doom was captured on bulky film cameras, The Villainess and Hardcore Henry are finally able to legitimately replicate the view given to us by an FPS. Rather than using a camera in place of an actor, filmmakers are at last free to strap a camera to the face of the shooter themselves. In the comprehensive behind-the-scenes features on Hardcore Henry, the crew explains the exhaustive process of how they positioned the camera, a GoPro Hero 3, on the face of the actor. The forehead might seem natural, but reads as too high. It didn't capture enough of the peripheral movement of the body. Instead, they found that cameras positioned directly over the actor's mouth gave the expected view. And the eventual rig, similar to a motorcycle helmet filming contraption in The Villainess, looks absurd. But with it, these movies are able to do actual stunts, communicate actual spontaneity, and use actual skill to an extent heretofore unseen in the cinema. It is tremendously cool. It can't alone make the movies good. Bianguil's The Villainess starts with a slow move down a hallway, an unpretentious camera shot that could be done with any number of techniques, until a hand pops out of the corner of the screen and shoots a guy in the chest. For the next 5 minutes, the movie cannonballs through a mashup of Old Boy and The Raid, a series of hallway fights against dozens of guys who each get stabbed, shot, strangled, and/or kicked in the dick. The level of coordination and speed here feels almost impossible, far from the plodding pace of Doom's attempt. The fights are truly overwhelming, a glimpse into the superhuman reflexes required for this kind of cinematic dance. It is also goofy as hell. The hand acting by the protagonist is fully in video game mode, which gives it an unrealistic amount of clarity for a scene as chaotic as this. She reloads her pistol by holding it directly in front of her face. She whips out her knives like she just selected them from a weapon wheel. As virtuosic as the choreography is here, and as kinetic as the camera allows it to be, it is nowhere close to natural. I am wildly impressed while watching. I am in no way fooled into thinking that this is a depiction of reality. Naishuler's Hardcore Henry gives me more of a spectrum of emotions than simply being impressed, maybe by sheer attrition. Because while The Villainess features a couple scenes shot from the first-person viewpoint, Hardcore Henry is, from top to bottom, a first-person action blockbuster movie. And it is simultaneously stupid and brilliant, masterfully shot and radically ugly, a film I would hesitate to recommend to anyone, and yet one that I'm almost ready to reclaim as an unsung action classic. Part of the joy in watching Hardcore Henry is you can feel the filmmakers asking, what do we want to see in first person? What would be interesting? It's the same question Lady in the Lake asked 70 years prior and landed on spying, car chases, and fistfights. Hardcore Henry, in fact, has all those things, but it also has parkour, flamethrowers, telekinesis, miniguns, more parkour. I would love to do a beat for beat of the action sequences in the movie, but for our purposes here, it's more relevant to talk about how the camera is used. There is actually an in-universe explanation for our perspective. Henry, the protagonist, is a bionic man. The film starts with him being assembled in a bathtub, his vision split, his right eye still in the process of being inserted. Here, once more, is the idea, if not quite the aesthetic, of Galloway's digital patina. Henry is a man made out of technology, pre-programmed to fight and run and shoot, predestined to explode when his internal battery runs out. While being put together, Henry receives an artificial arm that largely functions as his natural one, but is made by someone else, designed with ulterior motives. His eyes, our perspective, are the same. They are eyes given to him during his technological reconstruction, perfectly functional, but belonging to a third party. This is not subtext. Midway through the movie, Henry realizes that the bad guys have been tracking him because they have direct feed access to his site. It calls into question the perspective of the audience. Have we truly been seeing through Henry's point of view? Or have we been, like the villains, surveilling a live stream of his reality? Is there even a difference? Henry, for his part, is more than willing to play the role of the main character. He is, like Gordon Freeman, like Doom Guy, like that reviewer yearned for back with Lady in the Lake, a silent protagonist. His communication is done through gesticulation and violence. Many more lessons are taken from video games. Like gaming's exaggerated gore, the blood squibs in Henry's action scenes were 5 times the usual size to provide better on-camera feedback. The film was shot in 48 frames per second to reduce motion blur, though it was released in the standard 24. Certain sequences seem lifted wholesale from specific games, like a near recreation of Call of Duty 4's famous all gillied up mission, and a noticeably similar finale to Mirror's Edge. But unlike first-person shooters of the day, Hardcore Henry makes the camera a visible, noticeable part of its style. The lens, for instance, is quite obviously fisheyed, unlike most other first-person cinema, or even its gaming inspirations. This is not just an incidental choice. VFX breakdowns even go into how CGI artists had to flatten out the image, add the effects, then re-warp it back to the fisheye look. Like Blair Witch, the film is making real efforts to emulate a non-filmic visual style. Blair Witch came out of cheap camcorders and home movies. Hardcore Henry was made in the era of the GoPro, cameras strapped to mountain bikes, skydivers, and yes, parkour freaks. Its warping of the image may highlight its artifice, but it also grants the film the aesthetic of extreme sports, stunts that may be pre-planned but are undeniably real. The camera, more than the characters, the narrative, or even the shootouts, is what gives the film its power. This, too, is not subtext. In the denouement of the movie, Henry finally kills the antagonist by pulling out his own eye, wrapping his optical nerve, the camera itself, around the bad guy's head and ripping it in half. The camera, transformed into a weapon, fulfills its final purpose. In World War I, the first generation of military fighter pilots were preparing to shoot each other out of the sky. But so unprecedented was the style of combat, they immediately ran into a problem. How could they possibly train? The Lewis gun, the standard armament on most military planes of the time, could fire 600 rounds a minute. But ammo was expensive, and furthermore, it was impossible to practice firing from a plane without damaging other friendly equipment. And so, the Hythe Mark III, a gun as camera, camera as gun. Mounted to planes just as the Lewis would be, gunners would point, shoot, and later develop the film the Hythe was loaded with to find out just how deadly they would have been. As pointed out by Lily Alexander in her spectacular essay, The Psychic Burden of Being Watched, these aircraft cameras mirror a prior invention by Etienne Jules Marais, arguably the first movie camera ever, a gun that fired photos in bursts. In the 144 years after Marais' chronophotographic gun, movie cameras grew apart from firearms, and then, sometimes, recombined into one horrible tool. 52,000 days after Marais captured human movement on a single pane of glass, Jonathan Ross, a masked U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement officer, filmed himself killing Minneapolis civilian Renee Good. His perspective was not the first one we saw. Rather, it was an attempt at a correction. For 2 days after the shooting, bystander footage seemed to show a jaw-dropping sequence of events, a government agent shooting a non-violent bystander as she attempted to drive away. Then, in what was broadly considered to be an attempt at swaying public sympathy back towards ICE, Ross's own footage was released to the right-wing Minnesota outlet Alpha News and reposted by the vice president, who said, "The reality is that the ICE agent's life was endangered and he fired in self-defense." Ross's video, notably taken on his own phone and not a body cam, was meant as a sort of second killing, a character assassination to follow the bullets. Yes, it sounds bad on paper that a government agent killed an unarmed 37-year-old mother, but this video would show the public Ross's reality, explain through incontrovertible video evidence why he was justified in pulling out his gun and shooting Good 3 separate times, explain why she deserved to die. The reality was not clarified by the video. Ross does not capture his own gun on camera, nor the moment he pulls the trigger. He does not capture the direction of the car's wheels. He does not capture the fear for his life he reportedly felt. He does capture Good saying, "That's fine, dude. I'm not mad at you." He does capture the sound of gunshots, the car veering off the road, and himself or another nearby man saying, "Fucking bitch." Later analysis by multiple news outlets would combine videos to illustrate that Good was issued multiple contradictory instructions by agents to stay in place and drive away. They would show that Ross was not in the path of the vehicle or struck by the car, that he fired multiple times through the passenger window, that officers blocked bystanders from offering medical aid. But reality would continue to fracture. Different people watching exactly the same video and drawing exactly opposite conclusions. In the struggle to stop armed agents of the state from exercising indiscriminate power over the populace, or in the blunter words of protesters, to stop killing us, body cameras are frequently offered as a moderating position. It's easy to see the appeal. Body cams don't require a societal shakeup the way defunding or complete reorganization of the police would. It is, instead, just a piece of tech that promises to solve everyone's problems. If cops, ICE, whoever, wore body cams that recorded their actions, we could get rid of this damn ambiguity that plagues charges of brutality. Unspoken in many of these moderate pitches is another bit of grim optimism. Maybe, if these dudes know they're being recorded, they'll be a little less trigger-happy, a little better at their jobs. Body cams also bring us full circle aesthetically. This is the view the games we first spoke about are imitating, the warped camera image, the digital patina over Verite footage, an image that feels like reality precisely because of its shaky, improvisational imperfection. But reality is not so easily controlled by its capture. The first truth is that body cameras are not a shortcut to ethical cops. A 2016 meta-analysis found that body cams had no overall effect on police's use of force. In fact, if officers are given discretion over when to turn their cameras on and off, use of force actually jumps over 70%. As spelled out in a 2017 report by Upturn, officers are able to use unrestricted review of their own footage to create an illusion of accuracy by producing a false impression of how much officers actually remember about an incident. It is also not uncommon for departments to inconsistently release body cam footage, widely publishing the tape if it benefits the officer's case, or withholding it if it aids the victim. The second truth is our instinctual willingness to treat camera footage as a substitute for reality privileges the capturer, the first person, over the others in the scene. When we view videos recorded on a cop's chest, we're asked to scrutinize the potential criminality of everyone that passes in front of the camera's view. We watch the shaky, disorienting world with a sense of anxiety. A threat could come from anywhere. We understand the footage within this century's context of the first-person shooter, in which approaching figures are nearly always enemies to be neutralized. And the figure most invisible in body cam footage is, like in FPS, the shooter themselves. The cop disappears behind the camera, an invisibilized figure that is allowed power over life and death. We bestow tremendous authority onto images provided to us by the police. Think about how incriminating a mugshot seems, whether or not the subject was found guilty. Far from allowing us an unbiased view of proceedings, the body cam can become another instrument in warping reality to the cop perspective. As McKay and Lee write, the body-worn camera can assist in police-crafted image work while contributing to an overarching carceral visuality. That is, body-worn cameras not only constitute a certain police POV, they constitute criminality itself. This is, relatedly, my deepest reservation about the body cam aesthetic being used in games. Not that the digital realism will lead players to go out and recreate the game's violence in real life, but that it will further cement the view of a body cam as one in which violence is inevitable, building a view of the world in which the only reasonable attitude is fear for one's safety, and the only reasonable reaction is with force. I would be remiss if here, in the darkest corner of our conversation, I didn't mention the nightmarish trend of shooters live streaming their attacks via body-worn cameras. Though I hesitate to assign any overarching psychoanalysis to the people who do this, I can't ignore the fact that both the most infamous of these incidents, the Christchurch mosque shooting in New Zealand, and, at time of writing, the most recent, the attack on the Islamic Center of San Diego, were hate crimes perpetrated by white supremacists on Muslim populations. The live streams are maybe a sickening attempt to show the world through the shooter's eyes, to broadcast their own warped reality as widely as possible. Maybe it's this context that makes a single 4-second shot in Ari Aster's Eddington the most viscerally impactful version of the cinematic first-person perspective I've seen. A gun in one hand, a phone in the other, the character's perspective totally obscured by these two ways of shooting, reality filtered and perceived through a digital veil. It's deeply sad to think of this as the finish line for depicting the first-person perspective. This aesthetic, more harsh, more digital, is antithetical to the humanist desire of point-of-view photography. I mean, what was the original goal here? The impossibly ambitious idea of sculpting a series of images into the subjective experience of human sight to make art out of the very way we perceive the world. The idea was that sight itself could be a cinematographically beautiful thing. Nickel Boys, Ramel Ross's 2024 adaptation of the Colson Whitehead novel, is a film shot from the first-person perspective. It is unlike any film I have ever seen. What Ross achieves alongside cinematographer Jomo Frey is, as they put it, not a movie that captures what it looks like to see, but one that captures what it feels like to see. A movie about the beauty of perspective and the devastation of memory, a movie that manages to take the past century of struggle to depict the first-person perspective and make it seem like the most natural thing in the world. It is remarkable, in context of every example we've seen before, of all the ways Nickel Boys deviates. Most first-person cinematography pushes the frame wider, so wide the edges warp and it starts to bend back in on itself. Nickel Boys, in contrast, is shot in 4:3, almost a square. As we've moved into the digital era, the tiny cameras used to capture reality have a nearly infinite depth of field, resulting in POV images in which everything is in focus, everything equally detailed. Nickel Boys, though still shot digitally, has a tremendously soft focus, highlighting a single leaf, the bumps and ridges on a bracelet, the light playing across a piece of wood. Since Lady in the Lake, first-person camera work has focused on capturing the thrilling, the bombastic, car chases, fistfights, gun battles, parkour. Nickel Boy's most memorable moments are, in comparison, tiny. Avoiding eye contact, a trepidatious hug, a recognition of how oneself is perceived. The thing Nickel Boys is best at, though, is the way it captures others. We have seen voyeurism from first person. We have seen predation, lust, fear, criminality. But my God, 5 minutes into Nickel Boys and you remember what it looks like to see someone with love. This is in part because of that aspect ratio, which allows characters' faces to fill the screen. It is in part due to that soft focus too, like everything else in the world fades away. But those are both tricks that any movie could pull. What really drives home the love is the perspective, our perspective, the way the stillness of this first-person camera can communicate attention and respect and admiration. These are the most important looks in our lives, the way we look at each other. Nickel Boys is not exclusively in first person. There are historical footage segues in between scenes, which function as an almost abstracted form of memory. The repeated shots of the Apollo program, in particular, during many of the film's most distressing scenes, defy easy categorization. Is it to highlight the progress and barbarism happening at the same time in American history? Is it a trauma-prompted attempt to remove oneself from suffering, to throw one's perspective as far away as possible, to figuratively escape from planet Earth? The cinematography constantly asks us how we're able to see the world. In flash forwards, we see the protagonist 20 years removed from the events of his youth. These scenes are shot in third person, literally by a camera affixed to the actor's back. The implication is clear, made clearer in the climax. The trauma of his adolescence was an almost literally depersonalizing experience, the clarity of his earlier perspective obscured by his uneasy image of himself. We are shut out from his eyes, his face, access to his emotions. His silhouette occupies most of the frame. Reality can only exist on the margins. There is one, and only one, scene in the film that seamlessly transitions from first to third person. It is when the protagonist is taken into a room to be tortured. As he steps inside, the camera freezes in place, becomes untethered from his body. We cannot follow him there. There is a final point of irony in the effort that's gone into capturing our human point of view. Because, AI slop notwithstanding, every camera shot has a person behind it. Every perspective we're presented with, in film, in games, just as in painting and writing and architecture, is conceptualized and planned out by someone. In a very real sense, whenever you look at a screen, whether a shot of a sunrise or a crowd of people, an animated movie or a puzzle game, you are seeing it through the intentionality of the person who made it. Directors, cinematographers, technical artists, programmers, all of them at once. And in one interpretation, you could see the goal of perfect, immersive, first-person visuals as making all of those artists disappear. A portal into someone else's head without the interference of all the hands that usually sculpt our viewed experiences. A perfectly natural, perfectly verite way of communicating an image. But this would be an illusion. Convincing a camera to give the impression of human sight is an immensely difficult feat. It is so challenging, it's in fact easier to convince an audience to do the opposite, to forget that their sight isn't always defined by the imperfections of a camera lens, but to replicate what it feels like to see without digital patina or authoritarian surveillance. There is no shortcut. Because we are all so intimately familiar with it, because we tie our sight to our perception of what it means to be alive, reproducing our vision may be one of the hardest things you could ask an artist to do. And yet, in my months-long obsession with this, in my dive into what a camera's sight does and could look like, I have found something else. On simple walks around my neighborhood, the wind through the summer leaves, the sun-dappled shadows, the gentle bob and turn of my own head, if I'm being honest, the Nickel Boys soundtrack playing in my ears, I am rediscovering the miracle of my own ability to perceive the world. The billions of years of evolution that put two impossible cameras in my head, the billions of neurons firing in my brain that give me the ability to perceptually sculpt my surroundings, to look out and not calculate, not adjust, not question, but simply see.